Chapter 23 of Miss Ingalis by Gertrude Hall. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Reading by Matt Perard. Chapter 23. It seemed strange to be quietly and openly folding her things and laying them in her trunk. She felt like one who by accident had spoken the magic word at which the enchantment snaps and the barriers fall. She kept herself reminded, however, that she was still in the house of the enchanter. Clarence did not come home to dinner, but she found those of the family who assembled around the table informed of her approaching departure, and in a general way, with unobtrusive exceptions, unexpectedly pleasant about it. The understanding was, as she quickly gathered, that she was going to her family for a little visit before her marriage. Teresa professed to regard it as a very natural desire on her part, and was kind and sympathetic. Seeing it as an act of generosity to let the one whom she was disappointing save his pride as he chose, Grace lent herself to the deception like the little woman of the world she at her moments aspired to become. A good deal was said about missing her. It was a saving to the sensibilities that Teresa, who must have known the truth, should pretend thus heartily, and free her from the dread of reproaches or intercession. But Teresa's eyes! Those frank, good-humored eyes! Grace could not adjust her ideas to the mendacious eyes of Teresa. Rebecca, from her place farther down and across the table, gave her a long, steady look of indefinable import, but turned away as soon as Grace's glance urged hers to be more explicit. And when Grace, after dinner, approached her, she avoided Grace, consistently with her habit. After the lights were out, and Grace lay in bed, wakeful for a long time beside the slumbering Sita, and thinking of a great many things that she had put away from her to think over more pertinently in the undisturbed, secret, and counsel-bringing hours of the night, she tried to interpret Rebecca's look as conveying sober congratulations at her prospect of escape. In that connection she reviewed all that had passed the night before between herself and Rebecca. She recalled their words with reasonable exactitude. From much thinking, a little cold place came to be at the mysterious spot, in heart or brain or spine, which we will call the central seat of her. The hour at which Aunt Dolores was wont to start for mass found Grace listening for the rustle that revealed her passage down the stairs. She waylaid her, to say good bye a little personally and privately. A beam of genuine tenderness came from Aunt Dolores's face as Grace pressed her soft, plump hands. The two looked at each other for a moment. Then Grace threw her arms around Dolores, and Dolores, noiselessly in tears, returned the embrace. They did not speak, as if they had feared to be overheard, or as if both had known that they understood by touch better than by words, until Grace said, as so often before, "Pray for me," she added, underlying the word, and ceasing suddenly to smile, "really." She re-entered her room with a lighter heart, as if she had begged pardon and been forgiven, because she had not been able to exclude contempt from her young judgment of Aunt Dolores, and with growing just a few hours older she had seen her contempt in a new light. Dolores, well born, Southern, constitutionally indolent, had known bitter poverty in the period of her first widowhood. She had been brought low indeed when Uncle Miles intervened. So that now, with the growing languor of age upon her, to be housed, fed, kept warm, sheltered, had a value to her not to be estimated by those who were different. The money belonging to her by right was involved in overcome enterprises. She could be ruined by a turn of the wrist if she attempted to extricate it. Not brave in the least, she took the burden of her cross to the church each day, and got reconcilement there, even love for her enemies, some of them. to whom she had grown accustomed, for she was an affectionate soul. She dressed dolls for Zip, who was impudent to her. She darned laces for Teresa, who did not reprove Zip. Grace made apology to her in her heart, while determining never to become like her. Later on this same day, Grace slipped upstairs to inform Aunt Miranda personally of her departure, and to take leave, fondly, without witnesses, of her as well as dear, decent Nora, who, if her room had been searched for the missing money, had given no sign of knowing it. Grace had delicately tried for the favour of the invalid, pleasing her with little attentions, offerings of her favourite pansies and old-fashioned peppermints, reading aloud to her from the Bible, which voluntary task the old lady utilized in part to the child's own profit. Grace, in her opinion, did not show sufficient diligence in the reading of her Bible. On the Sunday before, after the memorable church going with Sita, Grace had gone to sit awhile with Aunt Miranda, largely to escape the others, but also for the pleasure of being able to answer Aunt Miranda's slightly severe question. "Have you been to church?" For once in the affirmative. She had found Uncle Sylvanus occupying the rocking chair on the other side of the cold stove, and had been happy over this, because, if she was before long not to see him ever again, she would have liked to leave with this overcome, who was so little of an overcome, the knowledge of her affectionate respect. He was more responsive to her conversational lures that afternoon than he had ever been, with the rest of the family present. He remembered her interest in the story of the young Jesse who delivered his brethren from captivity. He went far back in his life to tell something of his part in the story, the hardships of his boyish lot, until brother Jesse came to the rescue. The regard of both the old people for the memory of their big brother was touching. Grace noticed the soft texture of Sylvanus' large veined old hands, the delicacy of his features beside the ruggedness of his sister's, and believed that nature had had what are called absences when she mixed the elements that formed those two. The old man's smile, in response to her smile at taking leave of him, had been plainly the conveyance of an old man's blessing. It warmed her troubled heart to feel that not quite every relation of hers with the people of that house had been a failure. As she mounted the second flight of stairs between her floor and Aunt Miranda's, a voice reached her more and more distinctly, issuing from the high room, an unusual event, because Aunt Miranda's door was provided with weather strips to keep out the draught, or keep in the noises. The voice, raised above ordinary pitch, quavered like organ tones. Remarkably, the words born on that solemn and powerful breath, able to pierce the door, sounded to Grace's ear like "Woe unto thee, Chorazin! Woe unto thee, Bethsaida!" But they could not very well be that, she thought. She hesitated, then, jumping over the process of making up her mind, knocked. Nora opened the door a very little way, but, seeing who was there, threw it wide open for Grace to enter. Dolores was in the room too. Her face and Nora's both wore that blankness which serves to cover perturbation. Aunt Miranda was perceptibly in a state of excitement. Her cheekbones burned, her cavernous eyes were alight. Her black cap had been shaken out of the ideal symmetrical squareness on her head. With the same fine and unaccustomed vigor exhibited by her voice, her hands grasped the ends of her arm rests, and appeared like an eagle's claws, superb in some piece of decorative carving. It was borne in upon Grace by the sight of her that the old lady must have been having one of those "times" to which she had heard reference made. "Woe unto them, Chorazin! Woe unto thee, Bethsaida!" might, after all, have been her cry a minute ago. Uncertain what else to do, Grace proffered her hand. Aunt Miranda looked at her for some time before moving. She might have been trying to see her through a fog. She quieted down marvellously during that wait, and when she said, "It's Gracie. How do you do?" and gave her hand in reply. It was done naturally. She appeared her ordinary self again. Dolores rose with the alacrity of a guilty gladness, to yield to another her place of patient and respectful audience. After an expressive sign covertly to Grace, she tiptoed toward the door, carrying the narrowed shoulders and drawn in neck of one who scuttles to shelter out of a storm. Her impulse, it became evident directly, was shared by the sturdy Nora, who acted upon it, however, in a manner more accordant with her stoutness. She straightened a few things on the little stand. She shook into shape the cushion on which Dolores had sat. Then, still affecting to be busy, she set watch for Grace's eye, which, having caught, she spoke to it with her own little black lashed blue eye, to the purpose of making herself excused for taking advantage of the young lady's fortunate coming to gain a respite from the mistress's tongue. Wasn't she young and strong and fresh to the task? Wouldn't she be willing to sit with the old woman a bit and give the others a rest? Of course she would, being a humane and Christian girl, and Nora softly vanished through the door to her own room, closing it after her, all but a crack, which slender reservation represented her unforgotten responsibility as a nurse. "Dolores is a coward," announced Miss Overcome sonorously, looking at one door. "Nora doesn't wrestle with sin as she ought to," she declared, looking at the other door, and, after a challenging look all around the room, lapsed into a brown study. There was a chair with a hard, straight, high back of puritanical look, for which Grace had a liking because of its low seat. This she drew close to Aunt Miranda's armchair, placed herself under the old woman's eyes, and laid a hand on her knee, with a not very clearly formed theory that by mere sympathetic nearness she might woo her from her mood. Aunt Miranda looked at her broodingly, and decided to take her into her confidence. "This house," she said, "is going straight to hell." Grace's beseeching gesture and murmur of protest did not check, but fired her to livelier fulmination. "Is there one person in this house who lives as if he had a soul to save? Is there one person who you think had ever heard of the kingdom?" she inquired, and, receiving no reply, proceeded with fearful fluency. "I'm not speaking of Brother Sylvanus. I'm not speaking of Dolores. I'm not speaking of Nora, though if they aren't careful they'll land in hell too. I'm speaking of Jesse's tribe. They've builded them temples in groves on high places to false gods, and deserve the Lord's curse. Behold, they've let the cares of this world, the deceitfulness of riches, like thorns and weeds, choke the good seed that is spoken of in the parable. I don't see what they're coming to." She dropped from the biblical into the vernacular. "I don't see what they're coming to. To eat and drink and dress up, turn night into day and day into night, with theatre and dancing and feasting. It's all they seem to live for, and I'm like a lonely sparrow on the housetop, preaching, preaching, 'Flee from the wrath to come, flee from the wrath to come,' and it doesn't do a particle of good." Grace got possession of one of her hands, and by a yearning pressure tried to quiet her. But the gentle contact had no effect beyond making the old lady more exactly aware of the personality of her listener. "I know, Gracie," she said. "I know it looks to some folks, maybe it does to you, as if I must be crazy to have these fits when I can't keep from coming out with what I keep inside of me the rest of the time. But it piles up, till it reaches my throat and chokes me. Why isn't it my duty as much as the prophets of old to warn these people in the name of the Lord? Only there's no one to listen. They run the moment I begin, and what I tell them is true as gospel. They're going the broad way to perdition, every one of them. They don't care for anything in the world that I can see, but just the things of this world. And it's the deceitfulness of riches that has done it, Gracie." She had an effect again of taking Grace into her confidence. "The trouble begins with working so hard for money that your whole soul goes into it. Then, after getting the money, you feel big and important for having got it. It looks large to you, and you look large to yourself because of it. You put it before everything else, till, when it comes to the choice between money and doing right, between money and the good of your soul, you choose money every time. I'd like to smash their golden calf for them," she exclaimed truculently, tightening her fist into hammer shape. Grace, to divert her, used the magic of a name. "Your brother Jesse," she began. "Your brother Jesse. The crayon portrait in the drawing room shows that he was a very fine man. A man, I should say, of very fine character. I like to think of him. I should like to hear more about him." But the old lady disappointingly shook her head, and looked sternly despondent. "No," she said with a firm justice. "He was a fine man at the beginning. Jesse was as good a boy as ever lived. But the root of all the evil in this house was in him. He was the first to get caught by the lust for money making. He grew proud of what he'd accomplished all by himself, forgetting it was part the Lord helped him, and part the devil set up riches for his temptation. And then he went and married Inez Maria. After that there was no hope." "She died when Clarence was a baby," said Grace, tentatively, invincibly curious to hear more of that Inez Maria whose dark eyes, in the crayon portrait hanging beside the portrait of Jesse, reminded her of Teresa's. "Yes, too late to do any good," Aunt Miranda followed on vengefully. "She ought to have died before she brought her streak of black haired bandit blood into the honest and upright Overcombe blood. Where she got it from I don't know. A mean character. While she lived we didn't get an awful lot of good of being Jesse's brothers and sister. But after she died he made up for it. He thought a heap of his natural kin. He had us come and live with him. He was good to us. Brother Jesse thought a heap of his only sister, and was proud to show it. And it's because of him a good deal that I fidget so up here when I feel them all going wrong downstairs, all his children and children's children going as wrong can be. They're a different sort of young people from what we were in our youth. They have no respect for the old, no reverence for anything. They've no mind for good works, no care about doing right. With their indecent low cut dresses and red hair ribbons and ungodly bedizenings. Material things, I heard a minister call them once, material things. That's all they think about. To lie comfortable, to dress vain, to eat rich, make a show, have a good time, serve the flesh and their immortal souls, go ahead as if they hadn't got any." "Aunt Miranda," Grace stroked the aged hand, "things change with time passing, and the young people of today, I know, are not the same as you remember. But perhaps some of them care about the same things essentially, only they have a different way of showing it." "Grace, don't try to turn me away from anger. Don't try to excuse them. Don't think you know better than I." Aunt Miranda stiffened to grimness. "I sit here, and it comes up to me like the reek of something rotting, all the wickedness in this house. Down below me there are liars and blasphemers and extortioners and oppressors of the poor," she enumerated with vim, "and robbers and adulterers and murderers. Everything except pickpockets and desecrators of graves, and I'm not sure even of that. Jesse Black, or his brother Red, either, would desecrate a grave in a minute, or pick a pocket, if they happened to want to, and it was so they could escape the law. You needn't wonder to hear me talk so strong, and call them names like murderers and generation of vipers. I know what I'm talking about. Those two and Lonzo have blood on their heads, as sure as Cain. Their brother Miles would be alive today if it wasn't for them. I mean it. Don't let anybody deceive you. They wanted to make him sign a document that he wasn't willing to sign. Brother Jesse, so as to keep the business together, left all so no one could act for himself, but they had to agree. So they had to get Miles's signature before they could go ahead, and he held out. They knew he had heart trouble. They knew they'd no business to worry or frighten him. If there was one thing Miles was frightened of, it was of being frightened. And that's what they played upon, making believe to be just fooling. You could hear them laugh to the top of the house. I had my legs then. I went halfway down the stairs to listen and to try to make out what it was all about. They didn't frighten him into signing, but they did fuss him into a heart spell. One moment you could hear the coarse racket down in that room they called the den. The next moment it was still as death. I ran down the rest of the stairs, and so did Dolores, who'd been listening too. Miles was lying on the carpet, and his three brothers were standing round, not laughing much at that exact moment. They'd done for Miles. The doctor couldn't bring him out of it. You'd have thought that to see the result of their wickedness right under their eyes might have given them a change of heart. But I never heard any one of them take any blame. I never saw any fruits meet for repentance. They called it nothing but an accident and didn't let it bother their consciences. I don't know but it was troubling so much about that, about the hardening of heart of Jesse's sons, brought on my affliction. I don't know but it was that. Grace had buried her face in her hands. Aunt Miranda's eyes were fixed upon her, unseeing, but after some minutes the picture of her penetrated, stirring wonder and raising doubts in Aunt Miranda's mind. The wind of inspiration, the accumulated passion that made the silent old countrywoman periodically violent and voluble, was dying down. Looking at Grace, she felt uncertain as to what she could have been saying that should make this child crouch and shiver like one in pain. She essayed the difficult business of recalling her words, and during the mental labor of disentangling the relations of this thing to that thing, continued to look at Grace with eyes of compunction for having made her feel bad, the flower-sweet young girl with her pretty ways. Along with the sorrow for having made her feel bad, there was in the increasingly wistful, withered face a general sorrow for her because she was young and inexperienced, and would have to encounter so many troubles, make so many blunders, feel bad so many times, before she was an old woman near her release. They had a great deal in common, this veteran in life and that novice, in having one thing, at the heart of each nature, that mysterious needle, wavering but constant, which points away toward the same star. Grace felt a hand laid on her hair. "You feel bad because you're engaged to be married to Red," Aunt Miranda said in her simple, customary way. "Perhaps I oughtn't to have talked as I did. I had forgotten, when I did it, but now it's done I'm not sorry I told you. It's best to know a man before you take him for better, for worse. I've felt sorry each time I've seen you, to think of you marrying Red." Grace had looked up and exhibited dry eyes. After all, she clasped Aunt Miranda's hand again, lovingly. "Have you heard, Aunt Miranda, that I am going away?" Aunt Miranda mused, and while doing it felt of her head, straightened her cap, and looked an amenable Don Quixote again, with lance at rest after a royal bout. "Yes, I remember now. Dolores told me you were going home to visit your sister, and coming back in time to be married." "I am not coming back, Aunt Miranda. I am not going to marry Red. I don't want to talk about my reasons for this. I had my reasons before I heard what you have to say of him. I came up this afternoon to bid you good bye, because it might be the only chance I should have. I want you to know, Aunt Miranda, that I have appreciated you, and that I shall remember a great many things you have said to me which will help me ever so much. I will read my Bible oftener, because you want me to. That's a good girl, Gracie. If you remember it's God's word you ought to want to read it. You'll see that by and by it'll grow to be your greatest comfort. And you're not going to marry Red, did you say? And you're going away from us for good and all? Well, well, this is news. I hope you aren't having any big heartaches about it, Gracie, are you? Though I'm sorry for you if you are. I can't help feeling glad, too. You deserve a better man. There's nothing I want to say about it, Aunt Miranda. I just want to talk with you for a little while about other things." As if in search of a fresh, unrelated subject, Grace let her eyes roam around the room, or she might have been taking that circular look with a view to impressing on her mind for remembrance the things she was perhaps seeing for the last time. The stuffed dog on top of the wardrobe, the copper warming pan in the corner, the box for firewood pasted over with bright pictures. When she spoke, however, it was not clear that she had been doing anything but summon up the special kind of courage needed to ask an unusual question. "You have lived so long, and seen so much, thought so much, too," she fumbled for a beginning. "You are very wise. I feel that you are. I feel as if there were many things you could tell me that would help me, if I only had the sense to ask them. There's one thing particularly that you could tell me, perhaps. There is a passage in the Bible you who have read the Bible so constantly and meditated upon it there is a passage that I wish you would tell me what you think of. It is this: 'I have been young and now am old, yet have I not seen the righteous forsaken, nor his seed begging bread.' Haven't you, Aunt Miranda, ever seen the seed of the righteous, the children of just people, brought to where they were forced actually to beg their bread? It seems so unlikely, somehow, that because your father was a good man you, as a reward for his deeds, should be saved from the dreadfulness of having to beg. If a person could believe the Bible absolutely, and feel that confidence when he had to set out alone, for instance, without money, without knowing in the least what he was going to do next, oh, how differently he would feel, how wonderful it would be! What do you think about it, Aunt Miranda? I have been young and now am old, yet have I not seen the righteous forsaken, nor his seed begging bread. I'd give anything to know." The old woman appeared for a space to be thinking. Perplexity grew in her face, as if from a difficulty in remembering or concentrating her mind. An unusual effort of brain was reflected on her forehead. She said at last, honestly: "I don't think I ever noticed, Gracie, whether the paupers I've known about had good fathers. The folks who were on the town were mostly a pretty shiftless sort, which shows they hadn't been brought up right, and that wasn't to their parents' credit. But I don't know, Gracie. I don't know from personal experience. This I do know," her voice reacquired some of its earlier vigor, "that if you serve God, you can trust Him. We've got to trust Him, and take what He sends in the right spirit, as being what is good for us." "I know, Aunt Miranda. I know that's the right way of looking at it, for religious people. But it's dreadful, all the same. It's dreadful to be altogether without money." She covered her face again, as if to shut out a fearful prospect, or to shut in what further there was to say on the subject, and keep a hold on herself until this wave, too, of panic and woe should have passed. Aunt Miranda felt herself as not having been adequate, as not having given the proper comfort. She groped for some way of meeting the necessity of the hour more handsomely. Affection went out from her toward that young brown head bowed upon slender young hands which, she had an uncomfortable suspicion, smothered tears. In search of ideas she revolved and then repeated aloud the child's last words. "It's dreadful to be without money." "Yes, so it is. Who are you thinking of so situated, and feeling bad about it? It isn't you, Gracie, that needs money." Grace moved her head in a manner that could not be interpreted as meaning yes or meaning no. The first tremble of a glimmering current of understanding was yet established between her and Aunt Miranda. "Is that what you have on your mind? That you need money? How does it come? I thought you had plenty." "Oh, Aunt Miranda, I hadn't any thought of asking you when I came up here. But if you could, oh, if you just could, without telling anybody, let me have enough to pay my expenses down to Wilaka, where my sister lives. I did have some money, plenty, but it has been stolen. No, I don't mean that, but if you could let me have $40 or $50, in a few days I would return it. And it would make such a difference to me. I could almost believe that miracles were worked for the sake of the righteous, to keep their children from having to beg their bread. My father was so good." "I'd do it in a minute, Gracie. I'd do it in a minute, though I don't seem to understand how it comes that you no matter, for the present, but I haven't got any money to use. I never have, though I've got quite a good deal in the bank and in the business. They take care of my money for me. They draw out my board money and they pay Nora's wages. I haven't got a cent of money by me." "Never mind then, dear Aunt Miranda. Thank you just as much. Forget that I asked you. It won't make any difference, really, I suppose. I shall have to launch my little bark on an unknown sea in the dark in any case. Look here, Gracie, I haven't any money, but I've got something else just as good, I guess, for you can raise money on it. Now listen, and don't make any noise." She lowered her voice to a whisper. "You go and look under the bed. Lift the valance, so I can see too, and direct you. And you'll see plenty of boxes and things. The one I want you to pick out is a good sized green cardboard box. You pull that out and undo it, and you'll see in it a brown cedarwood box that was a cigar box. Bring it to me." So utterly had Grace a moment past given up the expectation of anything fortunate happening to her in this house, that at the sudden stepping into an old fashioned story book with its fairy godmother and fulfilment of forlorn hopes, the very quickening of her heart warned her to wait before she rejoiced, and made sure the treasure was not a fusty nut. Her hands trembled as she raised the valance, exposing just such a still life composition as the old countrywoman's words had evoked. The apple green box was easy to find, with fingers clumsy from their very eagerness. Grace at last had the dusty string unknotted, and lifted the cover. It was packed full with rolls of dress pieces, balls of worsted, bundles of newspaper clippings and tissue paper patterns, a collection of corks, indescribable miscellanies. But the cedar box was plainly in sight. This she brought to the waiting old lady, who pulled off the flimsy yellow ribbon holding it shut, and turned back the hinged lid, faintly fragrant still of cedar and Havana tobacco. This box also was crammed with things. The eye was first caught by a glass knob with a great flower embedded in it, like a fly in amber, fit to charm the eyes of a child. Caught, next in order for its strangeness, by a shapeless lump of blackened metal, which Aunt Miranda, forgetting the more important thing, lifted and fingered with curiosity. "We've never been sure what it was, but Jessie thought it was the old sugar bowl melted down in the fire when our house burned to the ground. He picked it up out of the ruins." She was lapsing into a dream of past things, but recalled herself. "Now, this is what I want you to see." It was a rounded wooden pill box of an old kind, with a faded inscription of a time yellowed label. The cover squeaked as Aunt Miranda screwed it off. A nest of pink cotton wool was revealed. With two brown fingers she pinched up a wad of this, and her face broke into a smile at the incongruous sparkle of white fire that ensued. "Jessie gave it to me," she said, taking out the flashing brooch. "The first birthday I had after I came to live with him. I didn't want him to. I said it wasn't appropriate for me. But he said it was. Besides, he said, it wasn't just a piece of jewelry. It was a piece of property. The value of diamonds doesn't vary, he said, and these are good ones. They're the real Brazilian." You can turn them into money any time you want to," he said. "I wore it a few times to please him. Teresa seemed to think I ought to give it to her after my misfortune. Then she wanted me to give it to Pinkey on her 21st birthday. Then she wanted me just to let the family dress up in it once in a while. But I don't see it. When I'm gone will be time enough. So I keep it where the sight of it won't be a temptation to anybody. Now, Gracie, you take this and raise money on it. I don't know just how much it's worth. Jesse didn't know either. It was all he could collect for a bad debt. Mind you, I don't give you this breastpin. I want you to give it in security for a loan, and then you send the receipt to me, and I'll make them redeem it. They'll be mad, I guess, but I'm not afraid of them, single or in a regiment." The white fires were again extinguished under a pinch of pink cotton. Aunt Miranda screwed down the lid with a squeak and handed the box to Grace. "You put that in your pocket," she said briskly. "Oh, Aunt Miranda!" Grace was pressing the bewildered benefactress in her arms, but regardfully, so as not to break her, crushing a smooth, teary cheek against the country cheek that would carry its weather brown to the grave. "You will never know what you have done for me. God bless you! God bless you for your dear, dear kindness. I will make sure you get back your brooch, never fear, without any of them knowing about it either. I will find a way. All there is now is to be very, very careful, dear, and to remember, and not to say a single word about this to anybody." End of chapter 23. Chapter 24 of Miss Ingalis by Gertrude Hall. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Reading by Matt Perard. Chapter 24. Earlier than usual in the morning, Grace was preparing to go out. Sita asked, as if nothing could have been more natural, "Where are you going?" "Out, Sita, simply out for the fresh air." "I guess I'll come too," said Sita sweetly. "Do you mind? I shall have so few more chances to go anywhere with you." "Hurry and put on your hat," said Grace with equal sweetness. At the first post box, Grace whipped a letter out of the book she was returning to the public library, and pushed it under the metal flap. "What was that?" inquired Sita in astonishment. "What did I drop into the letter box, do you mean?" "A ham sandwich, Sita." "When did you write it?" Sita's round eyed stare, her abused air and tone, were fit to engender mirth. Seizing Sita's hand, Grace, with unprecedented briskness, pulled her along at a run for the rest of the block, in an exuberance of high spirits that made her eyes dance and sparkle. "I will tell you. I waited until you were asleep, Sita. Then I crept out of bed so softly you wouldn't feel me. It took me 5 minutes. I went to my desk in the dark. I felt for the things I was going to need. That took me 10 minutes. And I carried them into the sewing room. There, by the light of those two little candles I used to heat sealing wax, I wrote a mysterious and interesting letter, the same you have just seen me post. And isn't it hard to think, Sita, that you can never know what was in it?" "What was in it?" asked Sita, unabashed. "I don't believe a word you say. Who was it to?" "I'm going to let you guess. I must have a little fun with you while I can, for our days together, as you say, are numbered. And Sita, since I'm going away so soon, and the good influence I have had on you is about to cease, I feel as if I ought, like a good older sister, to condense in a precept or two all that my example might have still done toward forming your little character and improving your little manners. Yes, you are a nice girl, Sita, in a lot of ways, but you don't pay enough attention to the graces and, shall I say, the amenities of life. For instance, you ought not to ask a person point blank, 'Biff, Bang! What was in a letter, or whom she was writing to. It isn't done in the best circles. Will you remember, dear little friend?" "What is the matter with you, Grace Ingalis?" sputtered Sita. "What makes you so queer, all at once?" But Grace burst out laughing, and Sita, willing to see as a joke the admonishment just received, laughed with her. They had retired to their room for the night, when Grace, seizing the first instant of an absence of Sita's, went with furtive haste to raise one of the window shades and stand at the open window. Her heart was thumping. She lifted her arms to her head, as if in the act of taking out the comb to release her hair, and assumed against the yellow shine of the gas-lit chamber the shape, for a moment, of the classic amphora. Almost instantly a light flashed down in the street. The ordinary spectacle was offered of a man with a blazing inverted match guarded between hands curved like shells, and of a man's face alternately lighted and darkened as he puffed at the cigarette which, with his lips, he held in the flame. The cigarette lighted, the match went out, but Grace, with the illumined face printed on her brain, the right face, peered still for a moment at the darkly outlined shape it had returned to be. After a rapid but careful measuring with her eye of the distance between it and her, she flung toward it, outside the railing separating the overcome yard from the side street, a small white package which had sufficient weight to lend it speed and keep it true to direction, the weight, in fact, of an old-fashioned wooden pill-box containing an old brooch. The beats of her heart were smothering her. "What's the matter?" asked Sita, who had opened the door in time to see the motion of Grace's arm. "Why have you put the blind up? What are you standing at the window for? What did you throw out?" Grace, still in the tremor and excitement of her success so far with this incredible adventure, and fairly dazed by the wonder of it being she, having adventures, conceiving and carrying out intricate conspiracies, turned to Sita with those same dancing and sparkling eyes, malicious, triumphant, teasing, of earlier in the day. "Incorrigible Sita!" she cried. "Do you want to know what I was doing? What do you suppose? I picked up the fruit skins that you, with careless charm, leave lying around on my half of the bureau, and threw them out where they won't mess me up. No, listen, here's a better one. There was an enormous spider, black, with hairy legs, Sita, the kind you don't love, crawling on the bed. I caught it under a piece of tissue paper and threw it out. Or, listen, this too is good. I threw pennies wrapped in a piece of paper to the organ man with the monkey. No, that isn't so good because of the time of day. Sita, I will drop my mask and confess my guilty secret. I threw a white rose to a troubadour out there serenading me. You thought it was the car brakes screeching. It was his romantic voice." "What is the matter with you today, Grace Ingalis? I don't believe you threw anything at all. But what makes you so queer, all at once? You make me want to shake you." Sita grasped Grace by the shoulders and did shake her, gazing at her meanwhile with eyes in which resentment, suspicion, hatred, were mingled with a grudging love, mellow calves' eyes, whose glance remained obtuse even while she did her best to sharpen it and search with it. "Funny Sita!" cried Grace, and gave her a sudden kiss on the cheek. Genuine, to reward her for not being any cleverer, also to make tiny amends to her for unreturned affection. End of chapter 24. Chapter 25 of Miss Ingalis by Gertrude Hall. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Reading by Matt Perard. Chapter 25. On the Friday evening distinguished as Grace's last evening, a goodly number of relatives and friends came to say good bye, and the occasion, aided by Teresa's social spirit and well-supplied cupboards, took on, as did so often these informal, overcome gatherings, the aspect of a party. The effulgent yellow pearls were all in service. Music flew from the piano, at which confident amateurs succeeded one another. Around the glass doors the older men smoked. The older women sat in the gallery and overlooked the fun on the floor, where things became livelier and livelier as the evening wore on, someone having suggested a cake walk, for which someone else put up a prize, after which there was a varied exhibition of home talent, a good deal of extreme and foolish caricature, but some good comedy too, amid a chorus of laughter. The scene was to Grace like something on the stage. Already the cleft that there should be on the morrow seemed to lie between it and her. A hard excitement burned her nerves and dulled her to all but the importance of a few preeminent things, to appear as usual, to observe closely and not seem to be doing so, to watch the time, to watch for the chance. They had all been, in their way, polite and friendly. The relatives and acquaintances had spoken of missing her, but saved demonstrations of regret, making light of the departure in view of the not distant return. She had taken it all with a smile of acceptance. She made a slightly somber figure tonight among the young people, being in her traveling dress, while they were in their muslins and light silks. It was understood from this that her trunk was ready for an early start on the next day. No question but she was charming in the bronze silk poplin intended for her honeymoon, planned in the period when she aspired to be an enchantress and believed in the legitimate efficacy of creamy lace and gilt buckles and artful contrasts of color, a point of rose to enliven brown. No question but she was charming. The brightness of her eyes, the bright constancy of her smile, called away attention tonight from the interesting touch of haggardness that more than one of the family had lately remarked upon. She had not been willing to join in the agitations on the floor. To one person she had said that it was too warm, that her dress was too thick for it, that her shoes were too heavy. To another that she was tired and must try to be fresh for the next day. She sat with Mrs. Alonso, finally, and looked down at the scene as if from a theatre box. Mrs. Alonso was a copious and not important talker. One could abstract one's mind without danger when she was once launched, if her subject failed to stimulate. Her second son had returned from his wedding journey, and the mother was giving the story of his affair from the beginning, her own first opinion of the young lady, her early objections, Len's knowledge of his own mind, her gradual coming round, the beatific ending. Her steady trickle lulled one like the purl of a brook. Clarence came in the midst of it and held out his hand bluffly to Grace, inviting her to walk with him for the cake. It was the second time. She shook her head. "I should appear too much a fool. One is the worse fool, isn't one, for not knowing how to make a fool of oneself amusingly?" "Oh, come on, Grace." "No, go on, you, Clarence, and make an amusing fool of yourself with another girl." After a moment in which her attention had been pointedly devoted to Mrs. Lonzo, he left. She had, in truth, established herself at Mrs. Lonzo's side because of Red's effort to waylay her, corner her, get a moment's private audience from her. It was among her clearest purposes not to allow him to accomplish this. They had been conducting themselves since the final break like civilized persons, keeping up the right manner before the others, bandying, as occasion rose, their old style of jest, touched with bitterness on his side, on hers with irony, and on both sides an odd tranquillity. The excitement that possessed her left little room for any feeling but watchfulness and resolve. Only one hint had she had in 3 days that her heart lived. On the night before, the wind preceding a thunder shower had moaned round the house, and as she lay in the dark, nervous from long wakefulness, a thought had sprung from that region where we are not the conscious masters. "It's my soul wailing for its lost prince." And then from that same region, "Or it's red overcome soul searching for me." Her flesh had crept, a wave of desire had swept over her, and she had been near the agony of tears again, when a gleam of sanity had cut down like a flashing sword between her lost prince and that red overcome of whom she was coldly afraid, like the unhappy lady affianced to the mysterious Mr. Fox in the old tale, after she had espied the little livid severed hand with its load of stolen rings. Things of the night, of the complex and confused nature of man, in whom the schism between heart and brain can be wide, between soul and flesh deep. The return of day had mended it. From that region where we are the conscious masters, softness had been expelled. And now she sat beside Mrs. Alonso with a deep light in her eye, signalizing her sense of being mistress of the situation. Oh, so much more than anybody dreamed! Teresa joined them, and fell in talking with Carrie about the plans for the new house, discussing the merits of diverse hardwoods, different kinds of finish. Grace withdrew her attention altogether to penetrate herself with the thought that this was her last evening in all her life among these people, and to say good bye to them in her mind. Rebecca and Harvey were the ones at the moment parading before the judges, like peacocks, like Carmen, arm in arm with her toreador, on their way to the bull ring. Sita was at the piano, strumming over and over, as if for a reel, one of the few pieces she knew by heart, and producing each time the same false bass chord. Zip and Bobby chased each other with the irrepressible cries of childhood, as if they had been in the schoolyard during a recess, and their mother did not notice a noise to which she was accustomed. They were now and then ordered, in a casual way, by a cousin or an aunt to shut up, but ineffectively. A veil of kindness rose between Grace's eyes and these people, clutched by the sense, tragic in youth, that she should never, never see them again. She desired, with that disposition of hers to put her little inward house in order, to do them greater justice, to leave them, in any case, with wishes of gentle good will. She had said that they were different from her, warp and woof, but human beings are not different to that extent from one another. She thought it a pity that she could not have been patient, magnanimous. But was it not only because she was going away that she was willing to see them in softer colors? For nothing in the world, she reminded herself, would she have remained. No matter. Let them prosper, be happy, and the light that they needed, as everybody needs light, come to them in its good time. From her place she got a glimmer of the redness of the den, where a large, crimson shaded banquet lamp near the door made vivid the crimson of the carpet. 6 years ago 3 brothers had stood, not laughing much at that exact moment, around a fourth brother stretched on the floor. Now a glimpse could be caught of Miles's widow seated at a little table in the drawing room, thoughtfully placing one card beside the other in a game of solitaire. Or was she, in the inextinguishable love of life, telling her own fortune? Black Overcome and Lonzo were tranquilly smoking their cigars outside in the cool of the evening. Red Overcome, who had rejected Grace's advice to find himself a different partner, sat on the opposite side of the oval, oblivious enough, and full strong, in case of memory, against its importunity. He was talking to the new daughter-in-law, the one of whom Carrie had just been telling. The young wife, who very likely was shy, had excused herself from taking part in the fun below, on the ground of weariness. From the distance Grace got a view of Red, in perspective, as a whole, like a picture. He was thinner, He had lost his fine colour. Poor Claire! Be his niece's dreadful characterizations of him true or not, who could say that he was without sensibility? And how good to look at, in that manifest manly way. Such a successful specimen of the genus man as he was, well shaped head, well shaped everything, engaging, completely, even nobly a man, to the eye, until you had come to understand that his outlook on the opportunities of life was identical with that of beasts, whose way it is to get what they want if they can get it, and no necessity felt for justification. With this knowledge you were enabled to see, as she was doing for the first time, to see stamped on him physically, marking his brow, a limitation, a default. His elbow rested on the railing, and his hand stroked his moustache, that masterful hand in whose exhibitions of strength she had delighted, that hand so admirably formed by nature to grasp and hold on. "Uncle Red doesn't let go, and if it looks as if he were letting go, look out. Then particularly he isn't," repeated Rebecca's voice in her brain. Grace rose to her feet like one in a dream. It was the moment. Teresa, deep in conversation with Carrie, Red absorbed in the youngest Mrs. Overcome and not looking her way, everybody engrossed and gay. With quiet gait, though her knees trembled, she with inconspicuous presence glided behind the chairs of Teresa and Carrie, finished, without looking to the right or left, the half circle of the gallery, and passed out through the door to the entrance hall, wide open, like all the doors to-night in the rotunda. Quite empty, the hall, God be praised, and dim under the single lamp of coloured glass. So empty and quiet, and everything upstairs so quiet too, it almost seemed as if she might safely venture to creep to her room and get a few things. She debated the point for half a minute, but, at a tiny sound from somewhere near, decided against it, and took a hurried step or two nearer the front door. Then her heart quite failed, because of the approaching muffled sound of feet. She stood still, to judge whether they were near enough already to make it too late. They were. She quietly turned the newel post, and pretended that she had been starting up the stairs. The door of Red's room opened so suddenly one might say it was torn open. Red stepped into the hall. Her foot was on the bottom stair. She choked down her despair and smiled. "At last," he said. "I've been trying all evening to get a word with you." "I'm very tired," she offered as an explanation of her withdrawal from the lights and noises. "But you mustn't go quite yet." With a stride he so placed himself as to shut off her way upstairs. She as quickly drew beyond arm's length from him, and was that much nearer the room she had just left. "Grace, do the thing that I beg of you to do. I pray, I entreat. Come back with me, and let them know we've changed our minds, or some circumstance has risen to change our plans, and we're not leaving tomorrow morning after all. Be my good girl, Grace, and tell them. Then let all this be as if it hadn't been." Without quite being humble, his voice, lowered to a whisper, was supplicating, his earnestness was compelling, but it did not get past the guard of one who, in wisdom and solemn forethought, had stopped her ears against all siren songs. She looked at him as if such thickness of wit as he persistently showed made her hopeless, without making her unkind. "You don't seem to understand. I don't seem able to make you." "Grace, I will do anything you say, anything you want me to. If ever a miserable offender loved a girl and wanted her love. Just in this one matter, listen to me, and do as I ask you. Give up going tomorrow, and you will have no reason to repent. You will have a lamb in me. You will have anything you want." "But, Clarence, the point is, I can't live near you. I can't breathe any longer. You oughtn't to have lied to me, you see. In an atmosphere of lies I can't breathe. That's the whole of it. I can't help it. I am so made. I can't live." "You talk as if everybody didn't lie. Everybody lies. You 2 days old kitten. I rather less than other men." "Not everybody. My father never lied." "Don't expect me to be like your father. Men in love are a different animal. I had lived 30 years, Grace, before knowing you. Won't you remember it, and hold the hope that your ideas will percolate gradually, and I shall know finally just what you do want? If you knew, Clarence, how much I want to be just to you, to be fair. Harsh and final judgments are a cruel folly, always. And I myself so blind, so full of faults. But this is what I apparently can't make you understand, that in order to be just, in order to do anything that is right and real, I must first be away from you. You must let me go." "Here we are, back again at the old turn in the road, the old struggle. For God's sake, Grace, get a little sense, get a little forbearance, get this thing into the right light. This evening, if you would only realize it, decides our whole lives. We can still be as happy as we meant to be. Perfectly happy, little one. But if you persist and our lives are ruined, as they will be, I warn you, mine as well as yours, yours as well as mine, it will be your fault entirely, your blood be on your own head." "So be it, Clarence." "Damnation, Grace, how can you be so stubborn? Put you in a mortar and grind you with a pestle, you'd go on saying the same thing. Don't, I tell you, don't put up this front of blank wall to me. I'm talking for your good. Don't get me where I don't care what I do. Don't turn me into a devil." "I think, I really think it would be better if we returned among the others. There can be no use in our talking together," she said, showing every feminine sign of offense and fright. "No, wait!" "I can't!" she cried back from the door to the bright gallery. With his imperious instinct to have his way, he sprang to stop her, but she was running outright around the curve of the gallery. He could have caught up with her, doubtless, by putting forth his athletic agility, but having their last race in memory, he was held back by shame at being seen behaving like an idiot for the second time before the same ironical audience. He repented an instant later, and started after all, but, seeing her descend to the floor, he again lost impetus and stood still, watching her as she rushed, under the impression, apparently, that he was at her heels. She looked rather silly, he thought, fleeing unpursued, and wondered how soon she would discover her mistake and let up and blush for herself. At the foot of the stairs, he thought, she surely would look back. She did, by a swift bird-like turn of her head over her shoulder. Her glance swept around till it located him, standing still, hands in pockets, savagely disdainful witness of her futility. He thought she would then have stopped short, laughed, got her breath, and to lend herself countenance, done some such girlish thing as to hide her face in the bowl of roses on the piano, or bend it over the pile of music, pretending to look for a favourite piece. But she continued, more slowly now and deliberately in her retreat, going with an unaccustomed stiff stateliness. Her back, the tilt of her head as she passed to one side of the staircase and threaded her way amid the chairs grouped about the glass door, had a look of successful contumacy, which called forth the response in him of a thrill of fire spreading to the end of every nerve. Two words, stored in what forgotten pigeonhole of memory, leapt from his lips and rang after her, already in the dark outside the house. "Hasta mañana!" End of chapter 25. Chapter 26 of Miss Ingalis by Gertrude Hall. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Reading by Matt Perard. Chapter 26. When out of sight of the loungers near the door, Grace ran, along the side of the house, along the front, through the iron gate, wide open for guests, down the street to the corner, around the corner. There her hand was drawn through an arm which tended to check her speed. "Oh, hurry, hurry!" and tried to drag the arm along. "Please not to be afraid. Please believe you are safe," said the looming man, the owner of the arm. At the affrighted "Oh! Oh!" which she uttered in dismay over his lack of comprehension, he consented, however, to hasten, but with a quiet steadiness. They had only the length of the overcome wall to go to reach the alley behind the line of low buildings bounding the overcome yard. There stood a closed carriage with its waiting horses and driver. In a second she was inside of it. In another second he was beside her. The horses started up and off at such good convenient speed as can be wrung from estimable hackneys. "Am I in time? Oughtn't we to go faster? Oughtn't the horse to gallop?" she whispered. "We have abundance of time," he said. She took her head between her hands, and there was silence in the coach, parallel, as it were, to the clatter of hoofs outside. "I was sure you would be there," she said. By this time the red mansion in the midst of its black railings was several blocks behind. "I was perfectly sure. Oh, thank God that you were there!" He made a slight sign in the semi darkness. He could find no trivial, appropriate thing to say. The moment was too extraordinary, too charged with wonder. "It came from your saying at the end of your letter, 'Yours to command,'" Grace went on. "I know it is a common form at the close of a letter, but I acted on it as if you had been the one to write it for the first time, and had sincerely meant it." "It was sincere." "That perhaps is why I believed it. I couldn't very well in my letter explain the situation from which I felt I had to escape, but you told me all I needed to know." "I can't talk about anything very well at this moment. I feel as if I were in a dream. I feel as if my being here couldn't be real." Again she clasped her head, and breathed hurriedly, tremulously. Of a sudden her breath stopped. It seemed to her that she heard Red Overcome calling, "Grace! Grace!" Mercy of heaven! Could he, by some inconceivable power of black magic, be really following them? Nothing was impossible with Red, terrible Red. No, no, they were half a mile away already. He was out in the dark yard, searching for her under the elm, in the corners, and she got the reverberation of him somehow calling in a subdued, troubled voice, "Grace! Grace!" It was as clear as if she had been there, recoiling from his groping hands. "Had you not better put on this cloak and hat?" asked Andreas Dane, in the harder, clearer voice of the actual world. He shook out a mantle, the blue of the Madonna's mantle, silken, fragrant, that made lines and folds fit to please an artist. He held it for her arms. He tendered a hat fit to charm a poet, a hat that was as much a hat as Mercury's, with shading brim and sweeping plume. He had remembered even the hat pins. She had not the quiet of mind to observe any of this rightly. Wrapped in her blue mantle, crowned with her plumed hat, she continued to be lost among crowding preoccupations. "After I get to my sister's I will write you. I will also send you money, and when you have the brooch back, this is what you must do. You see," she smiled with wan sparkle, "you see, I am still taking literally that unwary 'yours to command.' You must do this. Every day there goes to the 11 o'clock mass in the Catholic Cathedral a lady in black, rather plump and not very tall. You will know her by her hair, which is snow white without her being very old, and by her eyes with black eyebrows, and her sad look. She wears a silver crucifix. She is foreign. Ask her if she is Mrs. Dolores Overcome, and give the brooch to her, to be given to Miss Marinda secretly. She will understand. Yours to command, Miss Ingalis. You cannot enough believe that I am yours to command." Oh, it is all so strange and unthinkable." She closed her eyes to try to collect herself, and now she could hear Red Overcombe's voice, a little louder and much more anxious. "Grace! Grace!" She could see him at the farthermost end of the yard, trying the doors and shutters of the mysterious, blindly sealed warehouses. One would have thought he might find her there, after all, from the way her heart winced. But all that was over. "When I have reached my sister's," she said, "I will write you. Then also I will try to thank you. You must forgive me if I don't try just now. I can't even think at this moment. But that I can never thank you sufficiently, I know only too well. Miss Ingalis, there is one way to pay me. Just one. It is to believe absolutely in the truth of 'yours to command,' and count upon it accordingly." "Oh, how kind of you! How kind!" she said, but still perfunctorily, then added, aware of her inadequacy, "But it makes it less possible than ever to thank you enough." And again she closed her eyes in the effort to get a grasp on realities. She saw Red Overcome coming indoors, then passing, pale and unheeding, through the mirthful crowd, seeking Teresa and whispering to her. Teresa looked up, startled, rose and followed him apart. Teresa said, after his communication, "She must have come in by the other door. I'll run upstairs and see if she's in her room." Grace looked up. "I must write a telegram before I leave, and have it ready, so that at the first stop I can send it back to let them know I am safe, or they might spend the night searching for me." After that there was a long silence, while houses and street lamps hurried past, and now and then a late lighted shop window with wares immensely enhanced in brightness. It did not seem to him the hour for offering talk without any reason but good society's abhorrence of silence, which is not to say that he spent the interval in strict dumbness. "Miss Ingalis," he said, "you have spoken of thanking me. How shall I thank you? I was an ordinary man, a dejected artist. In the twinkling of an eye you made of me a knight errant with the attendant glory and dedication. You lifted me into a St. George with a princess to rescue from dragons. I rose to altitudes of capacity and force. I became unbelievably quick, resolute, effectual. I am at this moment of a size to defy destiny and conquer any world. All shall go well, now and after, because I am superhumanly determined. Your colors are pinned to my helmet. I have had a chance to serve you. You called on me and not another. And if this should be my 1 hour of glorified life, if this should be an episode and not a beginning, all the rest will not be too much to pay for it." The carriage meanwhile rocked and rumbled on. The hoofs of the horses beat in their moderate, rhythmical way, and Grace, looking out of the window, tried to pay more attention to the landmarks, wishing to know how near she was to her destination. The reason why she said nothing in reply to Andreas Dane's lyrical address was that he had not spoken aloud the things above mentioned, or even said them to himself as clearly as they are here set down. They were the song of his heartbeats. Grace got no echo of them, but she did from his neighborhood derive more and more a sense of safety. She came gradually under the spell of quiet. When her feet were on the stable earth again, when she was in the lighted station, amid people hasting on their various errands, with all the signs around her of practical things, the big clock, the porters, the ticket windows, it was the things of an hour ago that suddenly seemed unreal and like the delusions of a dream. Of all surrounding her, nothing was so solidly real as her stalwart friend, with the face, as it was now seen in the light, so well remembered, with its look of fine sanity, ability, reliability, combined with that modesty which made him a little awkward, while the attempt to overcome his awkwardness made him a little stiff. She ceased to be either afraid or in a hurry. He led her toward a little woman in her best dress and bonnet, who had been on the watch for them and at once hastened forward. "I have them in my hand," she said with anxious haste. "The tickets, the berth reservations, and in this bag all the things we shall need." "This is my mother, Miss Ingalis," said Andreas, "who is going with you as far as you go, to take care of you." He rewarded the sweet faced, careworn, slightly flustered little woman, whom with the darling son's high handedness he had impressed into service, by a richly appreciative look and the open praise that pleased her while she blushed for it. She has only one son, but she has a heart big enough for a dozen. Not to have the dreaded difficulties of travel to meet alone! The tension of Grace's nerves was so eased that gratitude for the relief, nay, for the immensity of good these two people were doing her, rose like a warm wave and made her heart brim over. She followed her impulse to take the little mother's hand and clasp it tightly. Then, driven to further demonstrations by the urgency of feeling, she kissed the little mother, nowise like a princess bestowing a gleaming order of chivalry, but like a child thanking with its soft, simple body for the comfort received. These two, with their, thank God, not too uncommon air of customary truthfulness, trustiness, moral worth, filled her with the sweet sense of having got home after strange excursions. This, was it not almost too good to be true? This was the usual, the normal thing, that human beings should aid and benefit one another, should speak the truth. This, and not black villainy. She had returned to a world where she could once more breathe, live. She grasped for a moment, with appropriate triumph and gladness, the accomplished fact of her escape. Travelers catching the midnight train saw walking down the railway platform a group of three who had nothing striking about them, except, perhaps, for its very beauty, the colour of the mantle worn by the slender girl going between the grey-haired woman and the young man with the bag. But if any among them had been gifted with an especial kind of sight, he would have seen that the girl in the blue mantle was carrying out of the conflict something like a chalice, borne as high as her arms could lift it, to keep it safe from the jostlings and the dangers, and in the chalice something comparable to a precious liquid, her inviolate soul. End of chapter 26. End of Miss Ingalis by Gertrude Hall.